Welcome into another edition of the Cardinals Insider Podcast from here in Busch Stadium. Brett McMillan, Elizabeth Meineke, and we are pleased to be joined by President of Baseball Operations, John Mozeliak. Mo, this was a little bit of a last-minute request from us, and so we appreciate you coming down and sitting down to talk some baseball here early in the season.
Yeah, happy to join you guys, and I suppose if we make any mistakes, we'll have a mulligan, right? Because of that short notice. But no, I'm looking forward to talking a little Cardinal baseball with you.
Well, it's a fun time to talk Cardinal baseball, not just because it's a new season, but off to a really nice start here. Wins and losses, obviously relevant in this business, but more than anything, coming out of the early parts of the homestand here, the thing that I've heard from people is there's just an energy, kind of that intangible. For you as the guy at the very top of baseball operations, have you felt that here in the early going?
You know, there's a couple things. Like, as you can imagine, you don't want to put too much weight on 3 games. But clearly, when you look back at those 3 games, we did a lot of things right. And that was great to see. And I feel like it's a little bit of a continuation of what we started to see in spring training. Early on in camp, we were really struggling to find our offense. You have to remind yourself some guys are only getting 2 at-bats, 3 in a game, and it's just not a normal game setting. People are getting their work in, and they're focusing on certain things. But when I saw what was happening at the end of camp, it started to get a little bit more exciting. You started to see the regulars playing more, and you also started to see more success on the field. And so I think there is some level of energy, not just from our fans, but also from our players that really came out of Florida, and that was great to see. And so, you know, you're hoping you can keep that momentum going. Baseball's a very long season. I always remind my friends, you play 162 over 187, and it's tough, and it's a long season. And so, you know, hopefully we can keep building on that, keep seeing little things that we tried to work on this spring come to fruition. And if so, I think we'll be a fun team to watch.
There were some tough roster decisions coming out of spring, and I wonder if that's something where you're glad in your seat because it means guys performed and they made it tough as a decision to make, or is that one of those things that keeps you up at night because it's not as clear-cut as maybe I assume you guys thought in certain areas going in?
Yeah, I think really what you're referring to is like the Victor Scott decision, for example. You know, probably 7-8 days before we broke camp, if you had said, "Hey Mo, who's your center fielder?" I would have said Ciani. Obviously, what goes into that decision, or why do you make that change? That's a very fair question, especially when we were like so adamant that this is the direction we were going. You know, one of the things that I always believe in is young players need to play. It's a really hard game, and if you're not practicing it or doing it on a regular basis, this is not the best place for you, because it's hard to improve sitting on the bench. And so at the time, the way we were going to construct our roster, or our lineup more specifically, was Ciani was going to play center field, and then how are we going to get at-bats for Victor Scott? I certainly didn't want this to be like a defensive replacement, maybe get 1 bat a game. When you're looking at 6 to 7 a week, that just didn't sound good to me. I always refer back to the Matt Adams example when we always needed that left-handed bat off the bench. But do we really want a young player just sitting here? And ultimately, we sent him back down. He got to hone his craft, and it ended up working just fine for his career. And really, that was my thought process. But over the last 7 to 10 days down in Jupiter, I mean, Victor Scott really showed that he was emerging. And in Ciani's case, from an offensive standpoint, he was struggling. And so it's hard to like promote and say we're going to go young, and then we don't do that. And so the more Ollie and I and the staff kept talking about it, the more we came full circle, and we're like, look, this guy's earned it. When guys come into camp, when guys have a great off season, they do the things you ask them to do, it's hard not to reward them. And so that's how that came down. And you know, just back up a question or a step on just sort of like roster in general. Like, I've been doing this a long time, and there have been many times I've been sitting in my office in Jupiter where I can't come up with 25 or 26 names. In other words, I'm like, uh-oh, we have a problem. This year, you're right, it was a little different, where we probably could have written down 30 names to make our club, that's exciting. But, you know, you want that depth. You're going to need that depth. This season is long. We will use it. So it's a good problem to have.
I know that the bats have come alive early. What was sort of the feedback that you were getting from players about our new hitting coach? Obviously, that was a big change to the coaching staff this offseason.
Yeah, so Brent Brown, obviously a new addition to our coaching staff. The couple things that I think are so intriguing about him is that he's much more strategic in the terms of how he thinks about helping a hitter. Maybe the way to get people to understand that, in other words, he wants you to understand like what you're good at and what you're not good at, okay? And then, because if you understand that, you now know how a pitcher is going to pitch to you. Now, pitchers will also pitch to their strengths too, but ultimately he's trying to get you to understand like, here's what you should not be doing and here's what you need to be doing. And I know that sounds very simple and like, why don't other people do it? But it's he identifies those strengths and weaknesses, and he's very clear on that. And then the other part is he holds individuals accountable for that. So after he has that discussion with you, and then say it's, for example, let's lay off high fastballs up and in. And if you swing at 2 of them, he's going to let you know that. Right? It's like immediate feedback, and it's the type of thing that gets hitters understanding, okay, this is what I have to stop doing, or this is what I need to start doing. But from that standpoint, I think the learning curve with Brownie was taking time for our hitters to adjust to him. He wasn't going to adjust to them, which I think that stubbornness is actually a positive. And so over time in camp, you started to see hitters start to understand his language, understand what he was trying to get them to do. And as I said earlier, I thought that last couple of weeks of camp, last week in camp, we started to see some of these things come to fruition. And that's great to see. Now, again, we have a small sample size. We have 3 games, but it is certainly more encouraging than what we've seen over the last couple of years in terms of just immediate impact. And so I do think it's going to be a positive for the St. Louis Cardinals.
He went and saw many of those guys, maybe everybody, I'm not 100% sure, during the winter. And I know just from a couple of the players I've heard talk about it, they seem to really appreciate that effort that he got on the plane, came out, sat with them, was present. Is that something in that type of hiring process where you guys suggest, hey, this would be a good thing we'd like you to go do, or does that come from the coach? How does a decision
It's actually
like that
mutual, because obviously there's benefit on both ends, especially if you're someone that's going to have a strategic plan that's going to be individualized. So if I can go spend a day or 2 with you, get to understand what your swing looks like, how you think about your swing, it's a lot more insightful than just me studying video. And then there's also that personal connection. I think all of us, no matter what we do in life, it's sort of nice to have that, and name, face, and have that connection with an individual. And I think from Brownie's standpoint, he didn't waste time. He took advantage of his time, and he used it in the best way he could. And obviously, we hope we see that pay in some sort of dividend. But the reality is I just think it made people more comfortable. So when we did get to camp, hey, I've met you, we know each other, now let's get to work.
I felt like you could, I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but when I was sitting in my seat opening day, I feel like you could see the fruits of some of that. I mean, watching the guys take their at-bats, watching them be able to send balls through the gaps. I mean, I was like, this is fun to watch. Like, you can start to see some of that bearing fruit, even if that is a little bit early. But I don't know, as a fan, I was really enjoying some of the early returns on those relationships that they were building.
I mean, I felt like the biggest thing that stood out, just from an offensive standpoint, was just a 2-strike approach. Guys, instead of when they're in a pitcher's count, 1, 2, 2, 2, they weren't just necessarily swinging for the fences. They were like, I got to put this ball in play, either advance the runner or find a way to get a hit. And so, I think that approach was something that we stressed all camp, but is something that we did see this weekend.
Well, 2 on-base guys moving around. They were playing one of the 85 theme songs the other day when Victor Scott swiped a bag, which I thought was fun. And it's certainly not that we haven't moved on the bases before, but I think, again, the energy in the building, it was fun to see those guys get on and run and move around a little bit too.
We have had speed in the past, right? When you think about some of the players that we've had, Tyler O'Neill, Bader, for example, but having somebody with that elite type speed like Victor, I mean, that is rarefied, and he likes to steal bases, which is even better. So, hopefully every time he gets on, a single becomes a double becomes a triple, and we take advantage of that.
Emotions in this game feel like they can really help and they can really hurt. You mentioned 162 over 187. You can't really get too high or too low, small sample, but it feels like getting off to a good start and the energy that builds, that there's something, I know as we think about it on the business side, definitely tangible with fan engagement For the feeling in the room, like when things are going good, I know this might sound silly, but how does that change it and launch you into a marathon?
Well, athletes are human, right? And as you have success, you what? Build confidence. And I think the more you play with confidence, or the more you realize you have confidence, the better you are. If you have doubt, self-doubt, and you're out there, and I've already stated this game's hard, it's harder. And it is really tough. And you think about, like, back in 2023, hate to talk about that season, but we got off to a very rough start. And I think right away there was a lot of self-doubt. We lacked confidence. We just didn't have that where we walked into the ballpark where people were like, they're going to beat us. But for 17 other years, we've kind of had that feeling, and that's something that you really want. You want to build on. And, this is a young team. It is a team that doesn't necessarily have like household names, but it is a team with talent. And the more they believe they have the talent, the better we'll be.
How do you sort of go about, from your perspective, like going to build to get that feeling back, right? You said, this is how people felt for so long walking, into this situation. And so obviously let's get back there. So how do you kind of approach that from a strategic standpoint?
Well, you're looking for the types of players that have that type of swag, that know what it takes to win. You think back over the last, really 20 years, and, we've talked a lot about, what Pujols meant to this franchise, what Yachty meant to this franchise, but we knew like those things weren't going to last forever. And so you think back in 2010 when we acquired Matt Holliday, the idea was, okay, we need that type of elite player because we don't know how long Albert's going to be here. And then, that goes into how we thought about the acquisition of Paul Goldschmidt and then the acquisition of Nolan Arenado, because you're always looking for those like franchise type players, because if you have that, then you can build around it. If you don't have that, then you're left having to find it. And when you say find it, what does that mean? That means you have to hit in the international market. That means you have to hit in the draft. And then once you do that, you then better develop it well. And then that's a hard path to take. And so the Cardinals, with the idea that we expect to win, where it's demanded in the city of St. Louis, that's why we were always trying to find someone that could fill that gap if we didn't feel like we could do it internally. And, I have mentioned this, publicly in the past. I think that's probably one of the greatest things that happened to us in a negative way was when we lost Oscar Taveras, because when he was coming up and developing, we did have him as someone that could be a middle of the order type hitter, specifically 3 in a lineup, and then hopefully have him for 10 years to build around. And unfortunately, he lost his life and it didn't happen. And that's kind of when a little bit of the scramble began for the Cardinals and trying to fill for that void. And it's hard, but that's really like the way we try to think about it, because when you're asking like, well, how do you build it from within? It's hard. And it's you have to have players that believe in themselves, but success kind of breeds that internally.
Wilson Contreras moving to first. It's kind of been fun to watch him make that jump and get in there and get his at-bats, the energy that he brings. We talk about youth. It certainly is a youth movement here. But for a proven guy like that, he's won a World Series. To make a big change, it's 90 feet, but I feel like that's a big change. What does it mean to the guys around him, to you as a front office, to be able to position him and say, okay, this guy's taking the lead and doing what we need to win, and how does that set a tone maybe?
Well, I think like if you were asking his teammates, they all admire him because they know how much he cares, they know how much he wants to win. And, I think last year it took a toll on him physically and probably a little mentally or emotionally. And so when we started to try to look at like, okay, what are the Cardinals going to look like? How do we best optimize what we have? Because we're not going to be that active in the free agent market. So what does that look like? And, a couple things came up with him. One was that he wants to make sure he can play every day. Last year, all the time he spent on the IL was not something that he enjoyed. He would want it to find a way to protect himself. And moving him out of catcher should do that. And then from an offensive standpoint, there should be some upside there too, because you're not getting the behind the plate beat up every night. It should free him up both mentally and physically to go out and swing the bat. So my expectations with him from an offensive standpoint are very high. I think he's going to be a very productive offensive player for us this year. And surprisingly, he's been really good defensively. So I think that's his athleticism coming out and his ability to adapt and adjust rather quickly.
Do you have any sort of mile markers or goalposts for, say, like the first month of a season? Kind of what are you looking at to say, okay, yes, we're on the right track right now? And
I try not to set those, because the moment like you start like talking about it, I think you then like focus too much on it. For example, like what if I said, oh, we just want to be above 500, and all of a sudden you're not quite there and you're kind of pushing to do that. I think like the biggest thing we can do in for that room, that clubhouse, is let them be. Just do your job. We trust you. We're giving you this opportunity. Now go run with it. And that's ultimately what you want to see. And I do think when you actually like sort of like take some of the names and put faces on it, some of these guys are looking to really make a name for themselves, prove that they not only just belong here, but they can be large contributors to a successful organization. That room in there definitely believes in itself. I feel like a lot of people don't think this club's going to be very good this year. I can understand why, but I can also understand why I believe we'll be good. And I think it's because these guys do want to prove things, and I think given the opportunity, given the chance, they're going to make the most of it.
I do know that there are players, on the roster that, Ozzy said people come up to me and, they want to see Mason play every day. Like there are people that, playing on your field right now that they're excited to come and see and watch that talent develop. I know we were talking about Victor Scott a little bit earlier, and I think you're mentioning, they're even enjoying, kind of turning to the video camera at some point, celebrating, and just kind of making sure that everyone, like fans and everyone here, feel included, because it's a good amount of energy right now.
There's a personality down there for sure. You can sense it. I hope it comes through to fans at home, because definitely when you walk through that area, you can see, and in the dugout when you're up close like in a photo wall, you can see they're having fun, and it's definitely a profession. They take it seriously, but fun is a good thing, I think, when you come down to the ballpark.
Well, I've always said that 3-letter word, F-U-N, if you're not having it, why are you doing it? And, I think sometimes in baseball, we get away from that really quickly because we start putting a lot more pressure on ourselves. And once you start doing that, you take away from the fun. I used to have, remember that little Staples button they used to have? You could.
Oh, yes.
So I had Barry Weinberg, who was a trainer. So this will tell you how long I've been preaching this 3-letter word. He went out and got that. And every now and then after a rough night, I'd go into the training room and hit it because no one was having fun. And you have to have that in a season because, like I said, it is long and it can beat you up. And if you're not smiling, if you're not enjoying it, it just makes everything else that much more difficult. And so, when you think about like clubhouses and camaraderie, that is something that we do think a lot about. And we try to make sure that like whatever we can do to lighten the mood, make people smile and make them enjoy it. But it's tough. Like if you're losing, it's hard to fake it. And when you're in a slump, 0-for-16, it's hard to say you're enjoying it, but that's the part of like where our coaches, our staff, we are trying to make sure that, everybody understands like, let's have some fun down here. Now winning makes it more fun, I assure you, but let's try to smile.
Mo, we appreciate this time. I want to end on this. There'll be a lot of time to reflect later in the year. Obviously, you're retiring, leaving this role, but opening day, all of its pageantry, you've stood out there with both the DeWitts many times over. This year, a little different. They played that tribute video, and I would have to imagine, just being human, you do look around and think, okay, this is the last time I soak this in. How did the day hit you, the moment hit you? Just anything you want to share about that?
Yeah, obviously I'd be lying if I said I wasn't thinking about it or it wasn't something that I would reflect on from time to time that day. But, in the end, I still know that right now I need to be looking at the now. There'll be a time where I can look back and, really enjoy thinking about my career and what it meant to be 30 years with the St. Louis Cardinals in one organization. Even my wife and I were joking, not too long ago about how, like, when I first came to the Cardinals, I was like, we might be here 2 or 3 years. Like, who knows? So don't get comfortable. And
the game is funny. So is St. Louis.
Don't get those return address labels printed just yet.
So I don't know how it's this is all going to end, but that day was special, and to to share it with friends, family, and have them be a part of it. It was really nice, and I'm grateful they did that. And I didn't ask for it, but it was nice.
Well, we appreciate you making this time. Good fortune the rest of the way here as we get into the season. I think it's going to be a fun summer down here at Busch Stadium. For Elizabeth and Mo, I'm Brett. We'll catch you next time on the Cardinals Insider Podcast.